Psychosis is a creepypasta posted on the 10th of April, 2013. And as a story, it loves to ask these two questions. How do we know something is real? And do we really have free will? They're interesting questions, but do we really know the answers? With that stated, let me tell you a tale. Our story begins cramped, lonely, and claustrophobic, with one man and one man only. We don't even know his name yet, but as he writes in his journal inside his apartment, we could tell in just a couple paragraphs that he's paranoid about something. He doesn't know what he's scared of. Maybe it's just because he hasn't seen anyone in a couple of days, since he had been putting all his effort into a school project. Sitting and staring at a computer screen can make you feel a bit off sometimes. After thinking about it, he claims that he needs to call someone. He needs to speak to another human being, whether it's in a call or in person. Because as humans, we need social interaction in some way, shape, or form. After trying to call his best friend Amy, she doesn't pick up, and an unknown number calls him. When he speaks, he's shocked at hearing his own voice. The unknown caller asks, "Who is this?" Our main character replies with his name, John. The man on the other side realizes that it's a wrong number and hangs up. After this, Amy calls John and she claims that she's on another phone. And John gets what he wants, a conversation. When Amy tells John that there's a party at 7th Street and that she could walk over to him, John laughs, claiming that it would be a waste of half an hour. But even after the call, John feels something is off. It wasn't her behavior, but that he didn't hear other people at the party, and even if she went outside, he didn't hear the wind. At this point in the story, it's quiet, cold, and the reader most likely just thinks John is being paranoid. Because you wouldn't really think anything absurd would happen, like an alien disguised as his friend would try to trick him. The next day, he actually calmed down, at first, before being even more paranoid. John even gets to the point where he sets up a webcam outside his apartment door. After noticing that one of his friends are online, he sets up a video chat with them, and even after the conversation. My strange fear has almost passed. I would feel completely better, but there was something odd about our conversation. I know that I've said that everything has seemed odd, but still, he was very vague in his responses. I can't recall one specific thing he said, no particular name or place or event. John gets an email from Amy asking him if they wanted to go out for some pizza, where they usually go. With excitement, he gets ready, but before he opens the door, God, I almost left the email and opened the door. I almost opened the door, but I read the email first. It was from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long time, and it was sent to a huge number of emails that must have been every person he had saved in his address list. It had no subject, and it said simply, "Seen with your own eyes, don't trust them, they." Then he realizes all the info he had given out since the start. His name, email, and possibly address. John comes to the conclusion that there is an entity trying to find him, trying to get him. Dread is the only word I can use to describe this moment, as not only John, but the reader connect the pieces of the situation. But there's no way he's correct. Right? Throughout the story, you get into the mind of John and you see things from only his perspective. The journal he uses is a perfect tool since it allows for an explanation of why he's writing these things down. But it also distorts the view of the story's world, forcing you to see only one point of view. By the end of Tuesday, you can tell he is cracked mentally. John claims to regret writing the journal, as well as that Amy is going over to his house and that yes, she knows where he is without telling him. As Amy is arriving at his door, John reminisces about the first day he met her. He writes, "I remember that warm summer day fondly. It seems like a different reality from this dark, rainy, lonely place." In no time at all, Amy had arrived and was knocking on John's door. John found it odd that he couldn't see Amy through his webcam, but he gets Amy to walk over to it and awkwardly asks her to say something to prove that it's really her. With that, Amy mentions the first day she met him. John at first is okay with the explanation, but he notices something. The webcam, the one he used to talk to his other friend on Monday, lay on the ground pointing at where his journal was now placed, where he had just written about that day. And then it hit him like a truck. The entity could have used the webcam to see what he wrote about that day. That day he met Amy. He loses it. He screams and destroys everything that he has that's electronic. As he does this, he hears pounding on the door. Was it Amy or the entity? John couldn't hear her voice through the door, or maybe Amy wasn't outside. But then she leaves. John screams and piles everything onto the front door. The reader at this rate is leaning onto the idea that John is mentally unstable. But in the next few days, it'll get worse, and he will become nothing like the John from a couple of days ago. Throughout the week, John had been giving his information. The random phone call that got his name, then his email, address, seen with your own eyes, don't trust them they. Cut off, unfinished. Was the message sent as a warning, a voice trying to help out, or is everything just coincidental? After thinking about it, John claims that the entity could kill him in multiple ways, including just having him starve to death. What if there's some worse fate in store? Someone at the door, claiming to be a psychologist. With them is Amy and a few other doctors. He said, "I have something called cyber psychosis, and I'm just one of a nationwide epidemic of thousands of people having breakdowns triggered by a suggestive email that got through somehow." I swear he said, "got through somehow." I think he means to spread throughout the country inexplicably. But I'm incredibly suspicious that the entity slipped up and revealed something. As an explanation, it would convince him if he thought the entity wasn't trying to get him. The psychologist continues. "We draw connections so well that we draw them even when they shouldn't be there. He said it's easy to get caught up in paranoia, our fast-paced world, a constantly changing place where more and more of our interaction is simulated. John has every reason to open the door. It explains every little detail that seems off, every strange thing he's heard or seen, but he still thinks he's being deceived. The explanation is too perfect." As bashing is heard on the door, John tries to figure out the question this story loves asking. What is real? How, as humans, can we tell something is real and not just some simulation or dream? John reflects on the email, and he realizes that the message was warning him about his eyes, not saying to trust them. After reflecting, he finally breaks. I calmly asked for paper and a pen day in and day out until it finally gave them to me. Not that it matters. What am I going to do? Poke my eyes out? The bandages feel like part of me now. The pain is gone. I figure this will be one of my last chances to write legibly, as without my sight to correct mistakes, my hands will slowly forget the motions involved. He blinded himself. All for this idea of how he was being tricked by an entity that gives him food and water. It creates fake conversations to try to get John to overhear, but nothing got to him like she did. The entity disguised itself as Amy and told him everything he wanted to hear. They could have had life together, that she loved him, and it even gave a convincing cry. But John knew that the entity wanted him to believe that he wasn't being deceived. He rocks in his homemade jail cell even after Amy stopped showing up, hoping that someday she's still alive. As the last human being, he's the last hope for his once thriving species that has been taken over by this entity, this puppet master of deception that takes advantage of our human desire for social contact. The desire for us to connect, find love, find friends. John will live for as long as he can, as the last human being, still with his own free will. I will never give in. I will never break. I am a hero. The doctor read the paper the patient had scribbled on. It was barely readable, written in the shaky script of one who could not see. He wanted to smile at the man's steadfast resolve, a reminder of the human will to survive. But he knew that the patient was completely delusional. After all, a sane man would have fallen for the deception long ago. The doctor wanted to smile. He wanted to whisper words of encouragement to the delusional man. He wanted to scream, but the nerve filaments wrapped around his head and into his eyes made him do otherwise. His body walked into the cell like a puppet and told the patient once more that he was wrong, and that there was nobody trying to deceive him. This is how the story ends. There is no final conflict, no chance for John to beat his enemy. There is no hope. John was right. He will be stuck in a stalemate with this puppeteer and master of deception for the rest of his life. Two kings on a chessboard that can't checkmate the other, an immovable object against an unstoppable force. Let me get back to the question I pointed to earlier. How do we know something is real? Do we really have free will? Our human brains and eyes say yes to that question, but what if we were made to think that way? Our lives could just be a simulation, a recreation of human history, controlled by the puppet masters above, pulling their strings to move us. Maybe not. Maybe not. But there's no way for us to disprove this idea. So, was clicking on this video your choice? Was anything you've done up to this point your choice? Psychosis manages to master manipulating the audience, trying to convince them that John is in the wrong, that the idea of all his friends, loved ones, and strangers trying to trick him is wrong, until by the end, the reader realizes that John was in the right. John was smarter than the audience thought. Here, wait a minute. I've been editing this video for a while now, but this part doesn't seem right to me. Yeah, it's one way of looking at the ending to the story, but there's more to it than meets the eye. The ending is so masterfully written because it can be interpreted in multiple ways, and it's the only story that does this type of ending well. Is John truly insane? Does the doctor scream because he can't help him? Or is the entity making him suffer? The story loves making you believe or disbelieve John like the flickering of a light switch. And to be honest with you, I've always interpreted the ending as John's delusions being real. He's the last human on Earth, the last person who truly has his own will. But really, take one more look at the whole picture. The story is called Psychosis, a mental disorder where you become completely delusional. The story is narrated from a distorted point of view where you can see John's erosion of sanity. It starts with little coincidences, abnormalities. His fears seem believable at first. But John's delusions slowly get worse. His behavior gets more erratic and odd before eventually John alienates his best friend, destroys his home, and then completely goes insane. Or maybe he is actually the last person alive. It's a mystery whether John's experiences are real or fiction. The story has an amazing understanding of what psychosis is, and the story is the textbook definition of suspenseful. Amy also serves a great purpose, as she humanizes John and gives him a motivation for continuing on. The story takes the concept of the fear of the unknown and places it in our digitized culture, which you could consider dehumanizing. You could argue that seeing a man go insane from his own delusions, slowly starting to lose his mind over things that aren't real, is even more disturbing. Because it's more human, unlike myths, monsters, or absurd gore will ever be. Something as simple as a knock on the door is used in the story in a terrifying, interesting, engaging, and tension-filled scene that perfectly shows the process of a man losing his mind. I think Psychosis is the perfect creepypasta because to me, creepypastas have filled the role of the modern campfire story, with a context, build-up, and payoff that leaves you with shivers or gives you something to reflect on. To me, Psychosis represents what not just a great creepypasta is, but also what a good horror story should strive to be. It executes everything amazingly well. In a way, exactly the definition of creepypasta perfected.